calling the meeting to order at 6:05. We have a quorum. We also have a couple of members who are going to come late, but we certainly have a quorum. We don't have a secretary, but I think we don't have a committee secretary. Our next item is to confirm the meeting agenda in order. I'd like to make a suggestion to the committee that we move agenda item 8 to the 5th position, as the 5th item for this evening. That would allow us to get the discussion going regarding the bulkhead early in the agenda. We know from the history of this committee, if it gets late in the agenda, then we end up spending a lot of time, overtime. So I'd entertain a motion to adjust the agenda by moving item number 8 to the 5th position on our agenda.
I'll move it.
Been made and seconded. Any discussion, objections? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved. The next item is to review and approve the meeting minutes from April 14th. I'd entertain a motion that they be accepted without being read, and we discuss. Yes?
Chairman, I have something I'd like to have addressed with respect to those minutes that was omitted.
Well, let's get a motion going here to, you have an edit or?
An edit.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
I'll move it to move it along. Second.
Made and second that the minutes be accepted without being read, and then we have a discussion, and we're ready to
Yes, thank
hear
you.
from
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I went back and actually watched the 2-hour session on Fair TV to make sure that I did say what I thought I said. Anyone who's interested in real live action, watch Penfield Building Committee meetings on Fair TV, right before bedtime. All right. I mentioned in the meeting, and I would like to have,
Where in the notes?
I'm sorry?
Where does find it?
Oh, yes, this would be in the discussion where we talked about the pavers. So this would be, I'll tell you exactly where. This would be on number 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph. Got it? Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to have included in the minutes the statement that I made that night, which essentially was that I was very disturbed that we as a committee were still talking about the pavers in the parking lot because we, in fact, had many discussions over many meetings on that topic. And in fact, we had 2 votes on that topic, both of which were to keep the pavers, and that it was disturbing to see that we were still talking about it as if it was a decision that had not yet been finalized.
Does that ring a bell with the balance of the committee? Or you said it's on the tape?
Oh, it's on the tape, yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any objection to having that entered? There being no objection, we would enter it and amend the minutes accordingly.
I wasn't here, so.
Okay, that said, is there any other discussion or amendments, additions, changes to the minutes before they're approved? I'd ask for a vote for approval. All those in favor, accepting the minutes? Aye.
Abstained. I wasn't here.
2 abstentions.
I'm with it. Aye.
Yeah. So you have 4 votes in favor. 2
Yes.
abstentions? Okay.
Yes.
That said, we have agenda item 8, which is now number 5, a report from Joe Michelangelo regarding the DEP status of the existing timber bulkhead, a presentation of a building foundation design of the design impact given the proposed reduction in the existing timber bulkhead height, and then approval of remedial design engineering costs. So that's our item 8, and we could start right off, Joe, with you making a presentation regarding where we are and what we're doing with the existing timber bulkhead?
Thank you. Good evening. Joe Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. And I'll back up just a bit to our March 10th meeting, which at that meeting I shared with the PBC an email that we received from Crystal Kallenberg of Connecticut DEP. And at that point, on our March 10th meeting, we were still considering the possibility of elevating the building an additional foot. So the previous day, on March 9th, we had a meeting up at DEP. Myself, Laura Pooley of my office, Kevin Chamberlain, the design engineer, and John Richer from another engineering firm, Ty and Bond, because he was involved in some of our grant work. So at that meeting on the March 9th, at DEP, we were still going over the possibility of a floodplain management certificate, which we needed for the community development block grant. And as part of that, Ms. Kallenberg, who's in a different office, was also at that meeting relaying some of the concerns that her division of DEP had, and she summarized those in an email, which was dated March 10th. And in that, it gets into some language about the bulkhead and the removal of the bulkhead. And in that language also, which she correctly uses words like recommends and advise, as I said in that meeting there. So following that meeting, DEP the 9th, the email the 10th, the Penfield Building Commission elected not to raise the building at this point of the project. And after that, we, I would say the DEP definitely, I would say they were more harsher in their tone after that. And this is through a series of emails and conversations. And what it led up to was a letter from the bureau chief, I'm not sure if it's bureau chief, division chief of the Connecticut DEP Office of Long Island Sound, which was dated April 14th. And in that letter, so Mr. Thompson is Ms. Kallenberg's supervisor. So in that, he used some of the same language as far as recommending and advising, because that's what they are. But in reviewing that with both, the DEP staff and, a phone call between Mr. Thompson's supervisor, Betsy Wingfield, who heads up the whole Water Bureau, and the first selectman, the position of the DEP, even though once again, they used words like advisory and recommend. Their position was that the bulkhead did not go through the proper approval channels, and we could get into the mechanics of that, and therefore they wanted it removed. And even though this leg of DEP is not a permitting section, they're a planning section, the recommendation, it appears, is much more than a suggestion. Even if they make the recommendation and we don't follow it, they enforce those recommendations, for lack of a better term. So we were at the position where brings us to, so after the 14th, the memo on April 14th, once again, the ramifications became more and more severe on that. Had a meeting with the first selectman on the 28th, myself, Mr. Went, Mr. Carey, and it did, and our position was, or some of the talk was, the pros and cons of leaving the bulkhead wall in place, and I could get into those also. But after that, there was a phone call to Connecticut DEP between Brian Carey, our conservation officer, to Mr. Thompson on the 29th, and he indicated the next step would be a notice of violation. We had another conversation the following Monday. Once again, DEP wanted a plan of action for the bulkhead removal. Let us know your plan now. What's your plans to remove it? And in that, once again, in that April 14th letter, even though its recommendation does mention threat of legal action or legal jeopardy, however it's phrased. So the confluence of those factors brought us to the actual construction schedule. So with the order or the force from DEP that they wanted this bulkhead wall out, the way the building project was moving along, the move of the building was on May 3rd, and on May 4th, the contractor, his next step was to remove the footing foundations and put the revetment wall. So we were in the position then of either telling the contractor to proceed as is, come up with a different plan, or we had an opportunity to remove the bulkhead during that span. And once again, DEP wanted a plan of action. We gave them a plan of action. Yes, we will, start the proceedings when there's an availability this week. So that's the series of events that led to the removal of the bulkhead. And just I'll share with you a couple of pictures. And unfortunately, I have one of those for now, but I'll get into that. So that the first picture, what you see, is the way the project was proceeding according to the design plan. What you're looking at there, I think it's double-sided for some reason. It's the same thing on both sides. But what you're looking at there is the locker room wing, taken about 2 weeks ago, the locker room wing with the sand on one side backfilled to the top, with the material under the building backfilled to elevation 11, as it was specified. That's probably just a little lower than elevation 11. The one that each of you have, that one over there.
Okay.
So what that has there is that's how it looked two weeks ago. That was how it was designed. So what you have there is you have sand on the beach side. Underneath that sand, you have a bunch of broken up concrete footings. You have some stones on top of it. Behind it, underneath the pavilion, where you see the grayish processed gravel type material, not technically processed gravel, but it's pretty tight material, that's the backfill under the foundation. And not only do we have that now, we probably have 100 piles driven in that section there. So one of the things we were faced with, and you can see the one that there's one picture there, is how the other section looked like. So one of the issues that we were faced with was, I agree in the real world, there's no reason to remove that wooden bulkhead surrounded by the earth material. Conversely, is it worth a legal fight since you have material on one side of the bulkhead, you have material on the other side of the bulkhead? In a sense, the bulkhead was negated by our construction project, by the fill under the building to elevation 11 and the fill around the building to elevation 12. So it's, lose the battle, win the war. On May 3rd, with the way the project was, to me it appeared our option was to remove the bulkhead.
So if you're speaking to this photograph is the looking east towards the beach club.
Correct. Yep.
And it simply shows on the left-hand side of what appears to be the top of the bulkhead, the compacted fill for the east wing, and on the right-hand side, a pile of sand and sand up to the bulkhead. You're saying that at this particular time, the bulkhead was just...
Yeah, and that's basically what it would be dressed up on top, but our finished product is even more than that. So, in that picture there, which was going to be if the end result, if the project goes along till next year, even if it was as designed, the bulkhead is basically sandwiched in earth fill and beach sand, so a lot of the function that was performed by the bulkhead has been taken care of in the project, the design of the project.
Okay. So that's where we are as far as the history of events?
Yeah, and what happened, so the response to DEP was that the section that was exposed, that we could get to, that didn't look like that looked like the single picture, where there's one of my public works superintendents standing on, that's the one that I only gave you one of. If you see that picture, the wall was exposed, so one of the things we told DEP that we'll go in there, our first plan was to try to dismantle it, see if we could unscrew it, remove the four whalers, remove the 3-inch by 12-inch by 12 feet tongue and groove sheathing, and see if it would come out, dismantle. And we were thinking maybe if we get one of them out, it'll all come out like a, piece by piece by piece. That was our first thinking, but the way everything was bolted together and tongue and grooved together, it acted as one unit. You had to, literally, the end result was the best way to do it was to basically push and batter it forward, and because you had a member that was 3 inches thick, that was the weak spot. When you hit it from the 3-inch side, it was able to snap off pretty good. We were able to get it out in pieces. So that was our, there was both a need to remove it, according to the order, and there was an opportunity, just the way the construction project, there was not just an opportunity, but it was not an opportunity to do it, but also, to sort of change direction with the contractor so they could continue working and not say, don't do anything. So the way those three factors aligned, that was the decision that had to be made on May 3rd, and it was made for those reasons.
So you're giving us a timeline and a kind of a practical approach?
Correct. And, okay.
And Jim Wendt is here. Jim, from a regulatory side, is there anything you'd like to add?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Jim Wendt, Assistant Planning Director. Firstly, I want to, certainly I want to attest, first of all, to the outline that Joe just gave. I certainly concur with the chain of events that he has laid out in the opinion of the DEP. And as you folks well know, on a project like this, especially when we are involved with outside funding sources, we end up serving many masters here, and DEP is one of those. So as we progress through this chain of events, it became readily apparent to us that nothing short of full compliance with their recommendation, if you want to use that word, wasn't going to satisfy them. So as this project proceeds, it was clear to us that nothing short of compliance was going to satisfy them.
When you say serving many masters and funding, can you elaborate on that? What you mean? We're not getting any funding from DEP.
No, we're not. Well, this whole flood certificate process came on their radar and went through that process as a result of the grant that was chosen not to be implemented as a result of the +1 foot requirement. So you're correct that that's off the table. But the funding as it trickles down from FEMA is managed through the State Department of Emergency Services, DEMIS, and funds down. So all those agencies are coordinating in the oversight of this project, whether they are a direct funding source or not.
Okay. Okay. Questions from the committee? Yes.
Thanks. Thank you. Joe, it's kind of after the fact, but we're talking about it, so I guess the first question that popped in my mind, as I walked on the beach and as I look at the picture, did did it occur to anyone to at least try and negotiate with DEP that, given the changes that we've made according to plan, it really isn't even a bulkhead anymore?
Yes, we did try to bring up those factors, and, one of the things that we think we have is an open relationship with DEP, and, Mr. Went works with Ms. Callenberg frequently. Brian Carey has a good relationship with Brian Thompson. First Selectman has a good relationship with Betsy Wingfield from the Mill River Project. So we had the lines of communication were open. There was a dialogue, but we saw that we didn't see any, compromise at any turn. So we kept hoping for it, but the once again and I'd say that the tone in the phone conversations was harsher than the written letters and the written emails.
Joe, do you have a copy of that letter? Because at the meeting the other night, we were shown a copy of the letter, and I believe the letter gave us options, and only one of them was ripping it out. I think it would be helpful for this committee if we could see that whether the DEP gave us one option that way or the highway, or they gave us other options.
Show it to the chairman. You read down here.
Well, you can take it.
And
Again, if I read from the thing, they talk about removing the bulkhead, and they also talk about alternatives. Did the town consider the alternatives in this April 14th letter?
and they have a series of checklists they have to meet to adjust those. But once again, it called for the removal, and it called for at least 5 feet. But once again, the conversations were much harsher than the letter. But there is guidelines on how you could propose these, but we were not optimistic that would work out.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
So, the bulkhead was originally installed for I assume, some reason. Has anyone, I haven't heard anything about engineering-wise of whether or not DEP came down on the town verbally or otherwise to take this out. Is it the right thing to do from a flood management perspective is one question. It was in our design, it was originally put in for a reason, and now all of a sudden DEP says something in a phone call to take it out. Has this been vetted by the right people from an engineering standpoint to say it makes sense to pull it out given the design that we're installing right now?
And just, from the original engineering design of the bulkhead, which was, designed by a civil engineer in my office, there's nothing wrong with the structural design of the bulkhead between the pilings and the whalers and the sheathing. So from a engineering standpoint, it works and it will work and protect to elevation 11. One of the parts of the design that had gaps in it, those gaps have been taken away. But right. the engineering design of the structure is the strength of it's not as question. And it's mentioned in the letter the potential for scour, and one of the enforcement arms is that this is a flood control structure, and the procedure that should have been followed should have had a CAM application locally referred to as from DEP, and they said their comment was likely they would not have recommended it. And even if we recreated the whole scenario, if we tried to recreate it after the fact, we don't think we'd have a favorable outcome from that.
So do we have more protection or less protection than we have more or less now that it's removed for what it was originally intended for? And does it affect, and maybe this isn't for you two, but for our design professional, does it affect anything that way now that it's out? Given the fact that we designed it, it got approved and everything else, we don't get to deep engineering, but there's a reason it was installed. DEP says they wouldn't recommend it, and now all of a sudden it's out.
Yeah.
What does that do? Is there any ramifications from that, from from the building itself, from the neighboring areas? That's what I'm wondering. If DEP just didn't recommend it, and we just went and took it out because of some pressure, are we doing the right thing from a long-term solution?
Okay. Well, ideally, and the way it was designed, we would have got all three. We would have had, the grading plan, a bulkhead, and a revetment in front of us.
Right.
So, from it's the design that, that everybody in this room, I think, wanted, and some in this room wanted more. But DEP did not want that much, and they want even less. So that's so that's where we are now. And if we did go through the process for the original wall, it most likely would have not been there in the first place.
And then my last question is, because that concerns me a lot, and I understand, but then if we didn't follow their stern guidance, what's the impact to the town? Is it this $500,000 grant? Is it all the FEMA funding? What's really if we're potentially sacrificing something that was in the design, vetted at the time we designed it, and I wasn't around on the committee at the time the design was done, it seems to me that we took this out, something that may be helpful for the surrounding area. What was the impetus besides taking it out? It's got to flow through. So if we didn't do it, what would have been the ramifications for the town or this committee, or both?
Okay. Well, I think, we would have faced a notice of violation and legal action from DEP regarding that. And, like Mr. Wendt said, one of the things that, we can't talk to anybody at Demis without DEP hearing about it, without Community Development Block Grant hearing for it. So yes, one of the the terms of the FEMA reimbursement is, you have to be in compliance with permits. So that's something that they check. So this probably would not have looked good when we, for our grant reimbursement.
A follow-up to Steve's question, I think a lot of us are concerned about the timing. You say that on the 4th, we moved the building. On the 5th, the decision was made that we had no choice but to rip it out that day. Now, to Steve's point, it may have been after a month of dialoguing and finding out that was the right decision. But once it was ripped out, it gives no ability to go back and reconsider maybe that was not the right decision, maybe it was alternate decision. So I think what many of the people in the room are concerned about, as some on the committee is the fact that why wasn't more time given? This bulkhead has been up for a long period of time. The process has been going a long period of time. In one day, it appears, a decision was made that it's that day, or we have big problems, the state is going to come down and sue us. Now, maybe they would sue us, but I can tell you from experience that even if they started legal action, there's plenty of time to dialogue it and find an alternative. So I suppose the real question is, why was the 5th the day it had to be ripped out?
Whatever the Wednesday is, so on Wednesday, I think it was maybe the 5th, maybe the 5th. Wednesday was the 4th. We could have told the Shawmut guys to break up the foundations and put them behind the bulkhead wall, and after you're done with that, keep bringing in the stone, and after you're that, put the sand and backfill. We didn't have to tell them. That was their schedule. That's what's in our plans. That's what's in our guaranteed maximum price. So we could tell them, go ahead and do it, or we could say, stop and go home, or we could say, do something else. So that's where we were on that Wednesday. So we could have said, they were in the position, of removing footings. We could have said, do something else, but we can't. If we tell them to wait, what are we telling them to do? And another a similar analogy is, they owe us, according to our plans, they owe us a revetment. Do we tell them to build a revetment now? It doesn't make sense going forward with, with the plan as is. And if you say just stop, well, stop and do what?
While you're thinking about that, the first page of this famous April 14th letter, third paragraph, because there are no copies for the public, I'm going to read this. This is the resultant damage to the pavilion and significant beach loss from Sandy reinforce our concerns that the hard structure approach is not appropriate for this site and may potentially lead to more damage and beach loss, more property damage and beach loss. Therefore, to avoid potential legal jeopardy and to minimize flood hazards, the town should not move forward with the installation of improperly authorized structures. I'm assuming, Joe, that that is a reference to both the bulkhead and the proposed riprap in front of it.
I think more about the revetment, because the bulkhead was already there. But yeah,
Well, their assumption, if you look at this letter, is that both would have been
correct.
improperly
Yeah, and we were also,
located.
we're also modifying, we're putting a cap on the bulkhead too, so yeah, they are,
That's in 6 inches. So, therefore, to avoid any potential legal jeopardy and minimize flood hazards, the town should not move forward with the installation of the improperly authorized structures. Pursuant to the applicable Coastal Management Act policies regarding new shoreline flood and erosion control structures in the coastal boundaries and in a VE floodplain, we respectfully advise that the town of Fairfield remove the existing bulkhead in its entirety, as well as any other existing improperly authorized structures. Alternately, a proposal to cut the bulkhead by a minimum of 5 feet below the existing grade would also be acceptable. For legal clarity, we recommend that both approvals for the bulkhead and the riprap should also be formally revoked. There's an implication in this paragraph that the bulkhead and the riprap were approved by them?
No, they're referring to local approval there, not the state approval.
Okay. So that's the paragraph for the audience. That's for those of you who are, that's the paragraph that you flagged. Further questions? Yes.
I'm sure we'll be tag teaming. Why are we just finding out about this now? Is my first question.
well, with the timeline, when we got the letter on the 14th, there was, like I said, about 2 weeks of conversations both internally and with DEP regarding the town's position and whether the town was going to fight it and what are the pros and cons of fighting it. And probably internally, as I said, on the 28th is when we internally felt it was the best not to fight it. And once again, and after the 28th was a Thursday, we still had conversations on Friday with Deep, on Monday, the 3rd with Deep, with hopes that this wouldn't come to pass. And once again, it was,
I keep hearing the word internally, and that concerns me because this committee, other than some of the email chatter that has been forwarded over the last several days, was never consulted about this, nor was our approval or recommendation asked for. This is something that, it seems to me, directly impacts the design that we approved, and action was taken without our approval, without our input, without us even knowing about it. That concerns me greatly. My next question is, considering that what we are talking about as consequences is legal action, which seems to be something the town's afraid of, was the town attorney, and the alternative was an independent environmental attorney consulted to advise as to what those legal ramifications could be?
I know Mr. Lesser was involved in a phone call with myself and Bob Merritt to Demis, so he was tangentially aware of it. I'm not sure if he...
Was any specific advice given by the town attorney or by any independent environmental attorney?
I didn't consult with him specifically about that advice. And just to, you know, the bulkhead was removed, but, you know, this committee can still build the plans, you know, as is if they feel that's in the best interest.
But we went through a lot of discussion about the bulkhead, and the decision was made to leave it in place. There were certainly some differing opinions on it, but at the end of the day, we decided to leave it in place, and now it is not. That concerns me.
Okay. And 40% of it is still in. If that is, you know, part of it had to be removed, and we're, once again, the way I was dealing with the order was the DEP, well, there is an easy part to remove. We could remove the 60% that's easy. We're going to figure out how to do it. We're going to do it. And then we're going to move on to Section B. So the way we've been progressing, we haven't moved on to Section B yet. Not that we're dragging our feet, but we're involved in other facets of the problem addressing the concrete that has to be removed. But that option is still out there.
All right. When you say you had to remove it, and I want to focus on that for a moment, you're basing that on phone conversations, a letter which certainly does not seem to indicate any type of a mandate or an order. It's respectfully advised. Now, I'm sure there's some kind of inside baseball stuff that goes on here where what's said isn't necessarily what's meant, but when you say you had to do it, I haven't heard anything here tonight, objectively, independently, certainly legally, that would indicate this had to be done. I'm not saying it was the wrong decision or a bad decision. I'm certainly not, you know, trying to bust your chops, but I'm trying to understand who made this decision. Ultimately, it had to be somebody's call. Was it you? Was it the first selectman? Was it a group effort? Who made the call that this had to be done?
Okay. And once again, I work for the first selectman, and, you know, he was aware of the decision and once again, and not speaking for him, but yeah, the mechanics of it, he wished would have went, did not go as fast and was before the board. So that's the way it plays out, and we'd all like it to play out. And if he was here, that's what we'd tell you. But unfortunately, from the time we felt that was our best option to implementing it was literally, you know, 4 working days, not even.
In terms of DEEP and their authority to affect this project, I want to get a better handle on that, and it kind of piggybacks on what Steve was getting at. At the end of the day, if we said, hey, DEEP, go take a flying leap for yourself, we designed it this way, we're going to do it this way, we're not getting any money from you, what would the specific ramifications be for this project in the town? And I don't want to hear its legal action in general. What specific sanctioning authority does DEEP have with respect to this specific project?
In the absence of compliance, their next step would be issuing a notice of violation, and then if we don't comply with that, would be court proceedings. Given the discussions we had, it was clear from them that we didn't think we had a pretty good a chance of success in coming to a different result. Proceeding as the schedule as Joe laid out because of the timing of the building move and the project overall, you know, a proceeding of that nature would take much longer than the time horizon of the rest of this building project. Like,
Now, when you say illegal action, are we talking about getting fined, or are we talking about an injunction?
no,
Stopping
it
these?
would be in order to effectuate the removal of the bulkhead.
So you're talking about a stop order, essentially.
Well, in order to do effectively what they're telling us to do, is to essentially remove the bulkhead. The time horizon of that type of proceeding would have been after this job would likely be completed.
So you saw an opportunity given the lay of the land at the site, and that's why you did it.
I think that's, it was
Accurate.
a strong part of the consideration, yes.
Okay. In terms of DEEP not approving of this bulkhead, is it because of the fact that it wasn't properly permitted? Is it because of the engineering? Is it because it didn't serve the function for which it was designed? What specific guidance did they give you in terms of why we want this thing taken out?
It was more the former than any of the other issues there. They have a strong policy to avoid structural solutions to flood control. And in their view, this bulkhead represents a structure that's inconsistent with coastal management policies.
Are there other government agencies that would disagree with that, such as FEMA, any regional authority, or is this something that is a widespread belief?
Well, it's solely the state's jurisdiction.
So basically what DEEP says is that's it.
Essentially, yes.
Which again leads me to my question from before, why are we just finding out about this now? And I'm not blaming you, I'm trying to get a handle on why we're getting blindsided with this at this late date when we've been at this for 2.5 years now.
Well, I don't know for how long they have had the plans in their possession. It's been since, I mean, Joe might be able to answer that, but, you know, we only were in the notified of their concern and the resultant factors in the early part of March. So, you know, we weren't notified very much earlier than you were aware.
I'll yield.
Did you have something you were second?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you want to go?
No.
So, I think to the general public, and maybe as well this committee, to cut through all the niceties, what it really sounds like is we got a letter from the state, and it said, you know, we don't like what you've got, and we, the town, took that to mean to understand that, okay, the state doesn't like what we have, and if they raise any red flags, it could deter our project, which is to build a pavilion, and we've got a pavilion to build, damn it, you know, full speed ahead, do whatever you have to do, let's get this pavilion done. It's really kind of what it boils down to, what it sounds like, right? Otherwise, we would have had the opportunity, as my colleagues have suggested, to have met as a committee to hear more about this, to understand what the ramifications were, understand what the additional expense might be to our building, which I'm sure we'll hear about later from our architectural and design people. It just sounds like the town made a decision, right, wrong, or indifferent, that, you know, that this issue is getting in the way of us building this project, so let's get rid of this issue. Would you say that that's kind of bottom line what happened?
No, and I think it was, and once again, this, you know, this commission will have a similar decision about the revetment and the rest of the bulkhead wall, and, you know, I think it's the only decision to make. But once again, that's, you know, that's up to this commission whether the remainder of the bulkhead wall gets installed or you continue as your design plan with the revetment. I don't see any possible benefit in going that way, but that's what we own, but it doesn't make any sense going in that direction, in my opinion.
Well, I suppose the only other question is now that the bulkhead is gone, is there any plans to do something in Plan B to try to replace or do what the bulkhead may or may not have been able to do? And that's I suppose that's way beyond this committee. But again, I still come back to, Joe, I mean, I think all of us would have been much happier if the bulkhead was standing there today. We had a discussion tonight. You came in and made a very compelling argument where it was in the best interest of the town to pull it out, and it went through the policy, and then it was pulled out. It's the fact that now we have no choice but to accept the decision, and I suppose that's the only frustration. Everyone's saying we don't know whether it's right or wrong. It would have been much nicer to pull it out after it went through a due diligence process rather than go. I don't know, does any committee feel differently about that?
I just.
One of many points, yes.
I think maybe not for Joe, and maybe that's why we have plans in front of us, maybe, I don't know. I'm just wondering if it does affect the design that we permitted through this town and the ultimate goal of what was on the plans and
Yeah,
specifications.
I was hoping that what we do is get as much of what happened out, and which we're in the process of, and then we've, if you recall, authorized a remedial look from the engineering standpoint from DeSalvo Chamberlain. So
Okay.
we'll hear from
I
them.
didn't mean to jump the agenda.
No,
but it's just-
no.
And,
I hear where you're coming from. You had another comment.
and I don't want, this is not meant to be wise, but, you know, I've been on this committee for, I don't know, maybe it's a year already, but it seems like every 3 months, there's another reviewing person that hasn't reviewed these plans that comes up with another requirement. Do you think we've been through everybody we have to talk to about the plans and specs for this thing? Because I'm not trying to be funny or mean-spirited when I say that, because I get working with the state of Connecticut. But is there somebody else? It was DEP planning, that was DEP coastal. Is there somebody else we should be talking to right now to uncover anything else that we may be, quote-unquote, either in violation or not approved, so that we can move forward?
Okay. And, just to share some, with our contact at Demis, our best contact, Dana Conover, who I believe heads the reimbursement division, he made us aware that he had a meeting with DEEP people on Monday of this week. So the same people that have been interjected in our project are involved in his public assistance grant. And a question was raised Monday about NFIP compliance, National Flood Insurance Program. So Mr. Went talked to the woman at DEEP. We talked to Mr. Chamberlain, came up with a response. Yes, we think it's NFIP compliant, but I think it's part of the, like I said, from the March 10th decision not to elevate. Yeah, they're very active watching this project. They're going to check the minutes to this meeting in 7 days. So that's the level of attention this project has. And, one of the things about the letter, not that the letter was good, but, it outlines the steps. So when you get a bad letter, you say, this is not good, but if we meet it, it sort of leaves them, it's hard for them to come up with something else if, well, why didn't you say it in the August 14th letter?
I understand. My question is, and I understand, DEEP isn't just one person. It's not just one little group. There's planning and there's everything else. Is there anybody else we can all think about to make sure they have these plans? Because we just went through this with the block grant 2 or 4 months ago, and now this comes up 3 months after. Is there someone else who's going to come up on a floodplain certificate issue or something else that we're going to be sitting here in September talking about another potential issue with the design and construction? That's what I think would be my concern. I just want to make sure we're vetting, we're sending this thing out, plans, whatever else it may impact anybody else that needs to review this.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'd like to follow up on that. Joe, what's the name of the firm that was hired to take us through the flood management certification program?
Tie and Bond was the firm.
Okay. And what's our contract with them? How much are we paying them?
Believe it was $8,000.
And when were they hired?
Most likely, I'd say probably August.
Of 2015?
Correct. Give or take, sometime around. And the purpose of that was to do the application for the community development block grant, to satisfy all the requirements. So I think they did everything that they could have done. I think the only problem was, I don't think they made any errors. The problem was when it came to Stacy Papano at Connecticut Deep Flood Management Certification and Jeff Kaola, they said it doesn't meet the requirements because there's not a foot of freeboard. And that was in late December, early January. So I don't think they were, I don't think they did anything wrong. It was impossible for them to obtain the floodplain management certificate based on not a foot of freeboard.
So, just to follow up, I've been a member and on and off, again, officer of a yacht club in Stratford that goes through pretty much annual review in terms of dredging and adding dock projects and things like that. And over the 20-year period, I've come to make a few relationships with the people up in Hartford that has proven to be very fruitful for us, at least at the yacht club. And one of the comments that was made to me by one of those people in Hartford is that Fairfield had this firm that was hired for flood management certification, but it was kind of a day late and a dollar short, and that we have in fact moved forward with several projects without having the proper certification in place, and that we should have done the flood management certification earlier in the project, and that the one thing that I wanted to take exception to, with all due respect, is the memo that you've sent, and you repeated it twice tonight, which is just why I have to take exception to it, alluding to the fact that this committee deciding not to raise the building the additional foot after the fact was what caused this. And according to two people at the state of Connecticut, that couldn't be further from the truth. And I wanted to just lay that out there, not to correct you, but to perhaps correct information that had been conveyed to you. And that according to the people that I've spoken to at the state, what caused this was that we had heard, the town had hired a firm to take us through the FMC process, and that's when this was all discovered. So, it's, again, day late and dollar short. That being said, again, with the experience that I have, I also know, and I think it's important for this committee to know, and for the general public, that this is not an easy process. It's not just one or two or three people that you need to speak with in Hartford, because as Mr. Michelangelo pointed out early in his statement, and the same as did Mr. Wendt, the various departments kind of touch each other but don't necessarily have final say over each other. So I know this is a very, very difficult process. It just sounds to me, from what I've heard from the people in Hartford that I know, that there were a couple of other touch points that the town should have made earlier in the game that weren't made, and that's what caused them to recognize this. And I just wanted to share that with you, because going forward, I would hope, to my colleague's point, that we have made all the touch points, because if we're sitting here in another 3 months and we find out there's something else about the pavilion or something, I mean, we're just going to tear what little hair we have in our heads out, I guess.
And just the mechanics of it, you know, the community development block grants that we got, the 500,000 and the 300,000, 75%. The town of Fairfield was not the applicant on that. The applicant was Yvonne Klein from DOH. So the mechanisms is that, you know, that we got our stuff. We had Ty and Bond did our work in, you know, in August and September and part of October, and it was this big. And, you know, they basically did their work in that time frame, and it was at DOH in October-ish. And then it got, you know, the flag started waving on or about January 1st about the additional foot, and then Ty and Bond had to redo it again, which brought us to probably the end of January. So originally it was submitted with the, in October according to design plans, and it doesn't matter when it was approved, when it was submitted, we wouldn't have got approval for that, but we just found out 3 months after we submitted it to DOH, and we didn't submit it to DEP, we submitted it to DOH. So that's how it gets carried through.
Joe, help me out here. So while this committee has been in session for 2.5 years, somebody out there is applying for block grants for the town of Fairfield that are now impacting this committee? Because we didn't apply for any block grants, and we didn't discuss any block grants. So, and there's somebody out there who's not even part of Fairfield that's applying for the grants for us?
The town of Fairfield applied for the grants for these projects, for the 500,000, the 300,000. The town applied, but it's state money, so that's what got us in the pickle to begin with. It's HUD federal money passed on to the state, so it's the state's money. So that's why they were the applicant.
Who was the applicant?
the DEP application, the floodplain management certificate, the applicant was Department of Housing.
Joe, I have to tell you, maybe we've all been sitting here too long. I have to say, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. The fact of the matter is that we're going along here as a committee, as a building committee. We work hard to do what we can for the town of Fairfield and repair this building, and we go before the various bodies and we ask for money. We had to go back and ask for money. Those are bond issues, and funded by a bond issue, and we're on our way. So while all this is going on, there is somebody in the town of Fairfield or in Hartford applying for block grants.
Town of Fairfield.
And these block grants, if I understand you correctly, and also I think Jim Went was hinting about it, they have these legislative or statutory or regulatory interrelationships, so that once you apply for one, you get dragged into the requirements of another department or another grant? What?
Yeah, you can't have a more rigorous evaluation. So we've probably gotten about $8 million of these grants as a result of Storm Sandy.
But what would happen if we didn't want them?
We
We never were given a choice.
Well, as far as
It's too late now
correct. As far as the town of Fairfield, we applied for them.
on our behalf.
Correct.
So let's see if we can move this along a little. Jim Went, I have, and I'm sure the committee shares it, a lot of respect for what you do and your relationships with these regulators. Do you think the town is properly interpreting the language from the DEP as far as the action that was taken? Do you think that things like we respectfully request and so forth, that doesn't really ring true with get it out tomorrow? How do you interpret this correspondence as you've seen it?
I would agree with Joe's assessment based on not only this letter, but the subsequent conversations that were had. You know, it's a recommendation that's preceded by, in order to avoid potential legal jeopardy, to me, is stronger than a recommendation. So to answer your question, yes, I think we interpreted it correctly.
Question, we're going to have to move this.
Yeah, I know. But going forward, if you're dealing with avoiding legal jeopardy, it is incomprehensible to me that the town attorney or some lawyer wouldn't be involved in that process. It's not your job, quite frankly, and it shouldn't be your job to make legal interpretations of a letter from a state regulatory agency. That's not what your function is.
I would agree with that, and it's not based on a legal interpretation. It's based on conversations with the folks that DEP that are going to ultimately make that call.
In fairness to this discussion, I simply asked a experienced individual in this business to gauge what this language really meant. That's where we are. You had one final question before we move the subject? We're not going to move the subject. We're just going to try to move something here. So we have these 3 touch points to our project, and we've talked about the possible impact of funding. In other words, if you ended up as we go through the FEMA process and ask for reimbursement, if we have a violation, that's a problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Then we have the building foundation integrity, which some people have referred to here tonight on the committee, and then we have the barrier flooding issue. So, Kevin, if I could turn to you to kind of break the chain here a little bit and give us some idea about what happens if this bulkhead is not in front of the building. What happens to the building and the way it's been engineered?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our view has always been that the bulkhead is a layer of protection for the building, but it's certainly not the only layer of protection, and it's not the most important layer of protection. The most important thing we're doing on this project remains that we're putting the building back on a pile foundation. The consequence of the bulkhead not being there any longer means there's a higher likelihood that some of the soil under the building and on the beach face of the building would be scoured and eroded. The piles will remain there. The piles will continue to support the building. There is a little bit more of a concern that more of the pile would become exposed in that condition than if it were than if the building was encapsulated with a bulkhead on one side. So our recommendation has been, and we've started to go down this road of adding some bracing between the piles to mitigate that.
Excuse me, mitigate what?
To mitigate the potential of the soils that are under the building from being carried away if waves run up all the way to the top of the dune, that elevation 12 where the sand is, and if the waves carry the material back out or deposit it into the neighborhood. So we just want to make sure that the piles are still stable if that happens.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you see this photo when it was passed out by Mr. Michelangelo that showed the beach side before the break wall was
Bulkhead.
removed? Bulkhead, sorry. So you're saying this is elevation 13 over here, correct? To the right of, on the beach side of the,
So the top of the existing bulkhead is about 11.6 to 11.7. So the darker material to the left side of the photo at the time this was taken is about elevation 11, and the sand to the right is flush with the top of the bulkhead, so that's about 11.6 or 11.7.
oh, I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say 13. Okay.
So,
So,
go ahead.
can I just follow
Yep,
up? And
yep.
Jim, I'm glad you're here. Part of my question has been in this recent design and the adding of the additional, I guess, fill, I don't know what you call it, underneath the building. I was under the impression, and maybe I'm wrong, that coastal management and FEMA wanted buildings to be built with the ability for waters to freely flow through, under, out, right back in and back out again. And I'm just wondering if by adding the soils and now adding something to contain the soils, are we going against what their wishes are?
Well, I'll let Kevin elaborate on that, but the design of this building is going to allow that water to flow underneath it, as you correctly state the regulations require.
In this case, the bulkhead was, for all intents and purposes, buried, right? The grade is flush on both sides. The waves will carry right over it. And again, remember, that's a pretty extreme case where the waves get up above elevation 12. But in that event, they would carry right over it, they would pass under the building, water would pass under the building freely. It would not be obstructed by any type of vertical barrier at that point. So the design does comply with the V-zone design requirements for free of obstructions.
So take us back then to the point of my 3 points. What sort of impact does the absence of the bulkhead have on your design?
Sure. What I did was, so we've already begun amending the drawings to include what needs to be done, and I passed out 2 11 by 17 packets. One, the first page has a bunch of dots on it. Those are the piles. So this is an excerpt of the pile
Do you
foundation
have any
plan.
extra copies?
There should be.
No, I'm just going to pass around to the public so they can look at it.
My copy back at the end.
I'll share one. I don't think we have copies, but again, I can have one, I can give you one here, pass it around. You got an extra one there?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
No, that's it. You got the same one.
I'm looking for that.
This is.
One is for the parking lot, we'll get to later. Foundation.
I'll give you the wrong one.
Thank you.
Sorry, we don't have more copies.
It's different to be sitting this.
Okay, Kevin, thank you. You want to take us further?
Sure. So the east addition, if you remember, we have timber piles that come right up to the first floor deck of the building. We did that because it was new construction, because we could, because it does offer an economy as opposed to pouring concrete. If you flip to the second page, what we're proposing is that we basically just bolt wood cross bracing between the piles, And
Kevin,
because of,
excuse me, I'm going to have to stop you. The drawing that the committee and the two that are in the audience are looking at is a drawing that has the piles and the grade beams on it. That's the first page.
yes,
Looks like a bunch of dots, and then it has the grade beams on it. And you're asking us to turn to the second page, which
Yes,
has
I-
just a sketch on it, a section of, okay.
oh, you got the magic one with a blank piece of paper, or did you?
No,
You got the right one?
no, we're good. We're at the second page, and we have something that looks like
Yes,
a
that's
table,
Okay.
a brace table in the backyard. And I didn't get the one with the blank page.
Okay.
You
No,
would have got
my
me.
printer tends to
You would've
spit
got
out
me on that
blank
one.
paper, so I apologize in advance if any of you got that. So on the second page, that's a view of two piles, right, where we're adding an X configuration of wood bracing between them. Not unlike you would see on a house that's elevated a whole story above grade, you would see cross bracing. In this case, because we're so close to grade, we're actually going to excavate a pit, install the bracing bolted to the piles, and then backfill it, so that it's really a fail-safe for the case where soils have eroded under the building. This bracing will take effect, if you will. So if you flip back to the first page, every place where you see one of those X's with the little squiggly lines around it, those are the locations where we've added this bracing.
Did I count 9?
I think that's right. So what we've done is put it around the perimeter of the east wing, because at the present time, the floor structure has already been framed over most of the area, so we don't want to have to go underneath the building to try to hand dig these pits, if at all possible. So we're able to come up with a configuration that we are comfortable with would achieve the bracing we're after.
Okay, and are there any other impacts of the change in grade or whatever might happen with the bulkhead not there?
Yes. We have to anticipate that the sand on the beach side of the building will shift around, both from storms, but also just from everyday activity, beach combing. A beach is a dynamic landform. So what we've done is we've run the steps that come off the rear decks down actually into the sand and buried 2 or 3 risers, depending on where the stairs occur, so that as sand is lost or shifted or whatnot, the steps are still there. It is going to still require that the town, as they have been doing for quite a few years, maintain the beach and grade the beach on a regular basis. And I understand that's already part of their program for the beach. So I don't expect that's going to create any additional maintenance work. They're already doing that. But this is just a way that we would have steps that are still there if some of the sand has been lost or shifted around. Similarly, on the handicap ramps, on the lower half of that page, there are 2 different conditions. The condition where we have a concrete grade beam structure under the west wing, and a condition where we have a all wood foundation under the east wing. In both those cases, we're extending the handicap ramps an additional 12 feet in length, which drops them a foot in height, which again would be covered up under the sand. So again, if sand shifts around, you don't have this big lip at the front of the first handicap ramp that it's still there, it's under the sand. So it's we think it's a safer transition. It was less of a concern, we feel, before, because the bulkhead was there and there was much less of a chance anything was going to be shifting around or blowing around or eroding between the bulkhead and the building.
So we have impacts of access in a couple of places, and we have impacts of having to brace the piles in anticipation that under an extreme condition they could be overly exposed. That's the way to say it.
Yes, and it's, frankly, it's probably a conservative concern of ours. We want to play it extra safe. I mean, again, at that point, the crest of the beach is at elevation 12. It's fairly high. Without the source of wave reflection there that happened during Sandy when the bulkhead became more exposed, I don't think you're going to see that massive an amount of erosion, but we just have to anticipate that it could happen.
While you're on the subject, have you thought through, or has anybody thought through yet, what happens to our concept of maintaining enough fill under the building or enough soil, sand, whatever it may be, under the building to protect the neighborhood, the so-called flood barrier question?
That's an issue that needs to be studied. My recommendation would be that since a similar study has already been done by Roberge Associates, that they be engaged to just reevaluate their report based on that core of wall and stone not being there, because they've already done the wave run-up calculations and determined, based on where the protection is, what the height of it needs to be.
Did they not, Joe? I know that the Department of Public Works and this committee collaborated in that, both the funding and the information. Were there recommendations that would make sense for this project? In other words, if they said, are there solutions to protect the neighborhood if the bulkhead is not there? Let's just say that, I'm not saying the bulkhead's protecting the neighborhood, but
Yeah, we could definitely use their input. And once again, they went through this exercise for the study they did probably about a year ago. I think it was a year ago. But their study, one of the things that they were studying was flood control structures. So from my memory, when they came up with, 6 different options, I think each one of those 6 options would have been a flood control structure that needs a CAM and OLIS approval. But in the course of doing that, I think there is some valuable calculations, wave run-up.
any of those options assume the new building, the repaired building was in place? I think it did. I think the whole reason for the study was to make sure that if Flood and Erosion Control Board wanted to
Yeah,
add a feature, that the building wouldn't stop it. So the options are
yeah.
assume that the building is done, finished, complete.
After
After the fact, not to lead you, but after the fact, we could apply for whatever this regulatory nightmare you're talking about, we could apply.
Correct. A flood control structure, yeah. So, but
And the other thing we could think about, although any of these options for flood control have downsides, some of them have big downsides. We could look at soft controls, which is what DEEP policies are in favor of these days, and look at a strategy for reinforcing the beach with beach grass. But very quickly you realize that that's mutually exclusive from trying to provide recreational beach area, because whatever we plant, people aren't going to be laying out there, and it's a very narrow beach as it is.
So we have we have heard how this issue developed. We've heard about what's happened at the site. We've heard about that there's this issue could jeopardize funding. In other words, a violation could jeopardize our relationship with FEMA funding. We've also heard that while we've been working for a year, 2.5 years, there's somebody else out there been going after grants for us on our behalf, which is nice, which got us into the part of this. We also have just heard that the building impact is manageable if we authorize these changes, which are going to be a cost to the project. We haven't looked at the cost of the project yet?
So, Mr. Chairman, we are still wrapping up this design. We're mostly complete, but we need a few more days, at which point we'll be able to get it to Shawmut for a change order pricing.
But it's safe to say that it's more work and it's going to cost money.
Well, what we have to quantify is the credit for a significant amount of revetment that's not going to be built.
Yes.
In all your deliberations, did you ever consider the fix that you're talking about tonight? Did you ever, in all your deliberations in planning this building to make it as safe to live for 1,000 years, did you ever consider putting those cross beams in?
No, we really didn't see that as necessary before, because we did have that extra layer of protection for the ground under the building by the bulkhead.
Without putting words in your mouth, then, you say that these cross beams are a direct result of taking the bulkhead out?
Yeah.
Is that
Yes.
putting words in your mouth?
No, it's not. He said
No,
it.
that's why we're here, yes.
Okay, I want to make sure everyone understands that.
That's why this remedial drawing is before us to review. It's a work in process, I understand that. So we don't have any handle on the economic impact.
No, but I would think with the credit on the portion of the revetment that we're not doing, that the add for the cross bracing would be not any greater than that credit.
Right.
So I don't think financially it's going to have really any major impact.
Okay, that said, I'm going to break from our protocols here and go to public comment on this one agenda item. But before we do that, I'd like to hear any more questions or issues.
I don't have I guess I do have a question. You said something about a race, I don't know the name of the firm, they did a study. Is there an action item in front of somebody to go get that study revisited now? I didn't,
There isn't an action item at the moment. We haven't gotten there.
all right.
That said, rather than have everybody sit here late, since we always like to do that, I'd like to hear any public comment. I would ask you to limit it to 2 minutes, and I hope that some of this information has been helpful. You know, we're not here with a bunch of answers right at the moment, but it's been helpful. It's a surprise to everybody. We're all dealing with it. This is the project that keeps on giving, and so, public comment. Yes.
My name is Rick Grauer. I have the honor of being chairman of the Flood and Erosion Board, and I sympathize with your frustration, because in 2010, the Flood and Erosion Board suggested the bulkhead. 2011, Sandy hit. 2012, the bulkhead was built. Then we had Sandy come, and subsequently, Brian Thompson sent his letter, which he refers back to a letter from Kevin of 5/4/15, implies how the bulkhead contributed to this situation. The DEP subsequently approved the renourishment of the beach, which buried the bulkhead, making it a non-issue. Yet, subsequent to that, they insisted that the bulkhead be dug up and removed. Maybe it's beyond my comprehension, but I don't see how a buried bulkhead has any problem. There's also a huge inconsistency in their thinking, because that same agency approved a hard structure bulkhead at the turnaround on Fairfield Beach Road on the peninsula to protect a small patch of town-owned asphalt. There's over 3,200 structures in the floodplain that this bulkhead helped contribute to mitigate flooding to. But yet, they want to take out a buried bulkhead, and the day before, they approve a vertical bulkhead that has an even shorter beach, a whole lot shorter than what's at Penfield. So I fail to see any consistency. I also met with Tom Stanky at the site while they were taking the bulkhead out, and Tom informed me, to the best of his knowledge, DEP has never taken a town to court over a non-compliance with their recommendation. Much as you were not included in the negotiations with the DEP, neither was Flood and Erosion. This bulkhead was a project initiated by Flood and Erosion. It was a flood and erosion control project. We were ignored from the whole thing. Tonight is the first time I've heard about other emails going on in meetings that we were never asked to attend. So I can't comment on what went on in those meetings, nor did we ever have an opportunity to present a defense for the bulkhead. We were notified by Joe Michelangelo about 10:30 on the 4th of May that they were making plans to remove the bulkhead. My secretary is here tonight, Dick Minkowski. We both responded to Joe in defense of the bulkhead on the 4th. We went down to the beach on the 5th. We found out that probably 100 feet of bulkhead was already out, not even 24 hours later, from the time they were making plans, per Joe's letter. He also started on the west end of the bulkhead, where they were supposedly going to be doing work, but yet on the east end, where they had put some revetment in front of the wall, they were actually building, and there's a lot of area there, and I don't see why they couldn't have removed the shallow spread footings and stockpiled them someplace. They didn't have to immediately go and place them in front of the bulkhead. If I was asked to tear down my house, to build a new house post-Sandy, I have to go and get a permit. I have to put a sign on front of my house saying the house is scheduled to be torn down on such and such a date or later, but certainly not before. And it's during that time when the sign's up, public has an opportunity to make a pitch for or against it, or to say nothing. This was not handled that same way with the bulkhead. it was considered, I would think, considered a town asset that was kind of decided to be taken out in the middle of the night when no one was looking.
Okay, I think we've established that. Is Flood and Erosion prepared to join the effort to look at alternative?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll meet, and I submitted to you, and I spoke to you earlier today on the phone, and believe it or not, I think must have exchanged at least 12 emails today with our first selectman, all on this subject. We're more than happy to work with you. I think that in your charge, the last item on your charge was not to exacerbate flooding. The removal of-
Not to get exasperated, or what was it?
Exasperate?
Oh, the flooding.
Exacerbate? I'm sorry.
Yeah, not to exacerbate the flooding.
Yeah.
Not that the committee
make
would
it
get
worse.
exacerbated, yeah.
The removal of the bulkhead, certainly don't think improves it. Not having anything there, you have the chance of a wave run-up, and as Kevin implied in his 5/4/15 letter, the sand has a great potential to wash out and go into the parking lot or the neighborhoods, leaving the town to go and scrape it up and try to put it back out there.
Okay. Now, can I ask you?
Sure.
I'm going to make a couple of comments about your submittal to the committee, and are you wrapped up? I mean, that's it?
Yep, okay, go ahead.
Good. No, I appreciate it. I'm not cutting you short as much as I am
I'm trying to give
move
you
the
your 2 minutes.
process. Huh? You went over the 2 minutes. That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
No. Rick has provided, interestingly enough, a cover memorandum to each member of the committee, and it does happen to have the race study, the documents from the race study. So for those of you who are concerned about what the race study was and the product or the deliverable, it's behind his email address. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Other than that, I have had comments with the selectman, and he feels that something needs to be replaced for flood prevention, and he's kind of throwing the ball back into your park, which I don't think it's something you want.
We are going to throw it to the grant writer, wherever he or she may be.
And he has also implied that he has no intention of giving back the $225,000 grant to place the riprap in front of the bulkhead.
He'll have to work all this out.
Yeah, lots of.
Glad you're going to help us. Thank you. Any other questions from the public? Yes.
My name is Kristen Robinson. I live at 218 Puritan Road, and I was coming to some of your beginning meetings. I've come to some of the middle meetings. I haven't been here recently because I felt good, as a person who lives in the immediate flood area, that you guys had decided that you were going to go beyond what the DEP is concerned with, and that is basically the structure of the pavilion and the beach in front of it, as well as waters. And you were going to take a strong look at what you could do to minimize flooding in the beach area. I recognize that you can't stop flooding altogether, but the barrier, which is now being dismantled, being discussed, certainly did help. And the Army Corps of Engineers, which was not mentioned tonight, was a big influence in this town when we first moved here in building the Jennings Beach sand dunes, and then also Rickards Beach, and there are signs to that effect. I'm not understanding why we're moving away from the idea of protecting that area in back of Penfield. The water just flows, saying the water's going to flow under the building and back is great, except for it continues right down the street and then comes back into the Puritan Road area and all the other streets there. My house is now elevated. We were flooded. We had no choice. But every time I go away, I don't want to have to worry about a car that's left in the garage, a lawnmower. I don't want to have to replant grass. Some of us have some form of wallboard that's a bit lower, and all of that would have to be ripped out. We don't know what it'll do to all of the fancy stone people are putting on their buildings. It's not right to assume that we can't have water flowing through there.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Also, there are a lot of things out there about the Army Corps of Engineers and what surge protection barriers did do for Stamford, for all sorts of other areas up and down the coast, and what they're currently planning. I don't think Fairfield can just say that that's not important and that we shouldn't be concerned about that.
Our design does everything we can do, given the physical constraints of that site to protect the neighborhood. We're not going to change that. We're going to continue to try to protect the neighborhood any way we
I
can.
recognize that you guys have really talked about that,
Right.
but I don't think you should stop talking about it.
We won't.
I think that that should be a key component, and if that building has to be rolled up to Mr. Tetro's backyard and kept there, well, maybe that's where it should, I mean, you know.
Can't
maybe
afford it. We
needs-
could get it partway there, but
Maybe it needs to be further away from the water. I mean, I'm just saying, you have to
That may be a
consider
little late,
the
but-
people that live there should
Okay.
come first in this
Absolutely.
discussion.
Thank you. We've
I
been-
do appreciate everyone's efforts, we really do.
thank you. A quick one?
2 minutes.
Shall I include the handout in the 2-minute distribution time? And just give us your identification. Take
I'm
us-
Dick Mahusky, 241 Colonial Drive. I am a member of the Flood and Erosion Control Board, but this is just my personal comments, although that does give me some knowledge about this general topic. I am not going to say a word about DEEP. What I handed out, this refers back to a document that I sent Mr. Bradley almost a year ago after I had the opportunity to listen to RACE present their alternatives for flood protection for the neighborhood. And basically what this document does is give you my opinion that their number 4 is a pretty good idea. And this basically puts a flood protection structure at the edge of the parking lot. Simplistically, if you look at the existing plans, the stacked block wall to retain the sand under the building comes up to elevation 12, 11 and a half, and the ramps and the stairs, I believe that can all be worked around so that we get a robust with the proper foundation flood wall at that location. RACE's study, you'll see in here, RACE proposed a 16-foot elevation for that flood wall. They do have whether it's on the drawings, I can't recall, but these are just preliminary numbers. They have not done a specific wave run-up modeling for these elevations that they have. And just RACE's entire study, the 8 drawings, they are posted on the Flood and Erosion Control Board website. So anybody can go there and look at those drawings to their heart's content.
All right, thank you. This is a good document, and I appreciate you presenting
And
it.
I would just like to close that without the timber bulkhead, storm surge and waves will run up the beach unimpeded, and a more substantial retaining wall will be required to keep the entire beach from washing onto Fairfield Beach Road. Edward Street? That should be our flood mitigation structure at Penfield. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dick. Appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Ilse Martin. I've been a resident since '85. I'm a member of the Fairfield Beach Resident Association, but I'm speaking right now as a private citizen. First of all, congratulations to your job and to the patients that you have conveyed. Regarding the town's caving at this purported threat, I'm reminded of one of my favorite books, The Power Broker, where Robert Moses built the parkways, he built the bridges. He got sued. Boy, did he get sued. And he got sued by people with money, the Macy's, the Gimbels, all of the top echelon. He kept right going. I think the town caved too quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that observation. Anybody else? Joe, you have some,
Just a quick follow-up on one of Mr. Grauer's comments about, leaving, there's still a lot of concrete footings there that are on site, and Mr. Grauer's suggestion will leave them there. Well, we were talking about, pushing the project forward. Well, the intent is to keep Shawmut working and remove them. So once again, if that is the desire, that's sort of a direction that the general that the construction manager needs, so.
Yeah, broken up and buried as part of the revetment.
So that's sort of the decision tree. If you're not going to bury them.
Well, they're gone. They're being
there's
disposed
still,
of.
There's still quite a bit of them there. They were gone the last couple of days, though, okay. Good, okay.
So, thank you, Joe. We've closed out public comment. Yes, we're about to close out public comment.
Drew Georgiadis, District 9 RTM Rep, 321 Puritan Road, a neighbor. My question is for the committee and maybe for the Flood Erosion Board and the difference between hardscape solutions and softscape solutions. The bulkhead, was the original bulkhead approved by DEP? Was it, did it have to, why was it non-compliant? All those things seem to be, some people believe in the hardscape, some people believe in the softscape. I think we need to figure out what's going to work best for the town of Fairfield, what's going to keep us in compliance, what's going to prevent us from wasting money. That bulkhead costs $210,000 or something, and now it's gone. So we shouldn't be throwing, we should know if it's compliant, we should know what's required, we should know what works. From a state guideline, from a federal guideline, there are lots of solutions globally being looked at, and I think the town should look at all of those things and explore them thoroughly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've closed off public comment. We need to close off this agenda item. We've got other things we have to discuss tonight. I'm not sure where we go, and I'm going to look to you, Kevin, for some guidance on this from a design and engineering standpoint. And while Joe is still here, essentially this project continues. And the question's going to be before this committee, the addition of the bracing and the modifications to beach access for handicap access. That's our solution to this problem.
Yeah, as of right now, construction is continuing, and I don't believe the schedule's been affected as of yet. Is that right? No.
Okay, so that's
And I don't think anything we're talking about has a major schedule impact. Again, we think that the credit will be more than the add for what the good that's worth, and the things we're adding can be done without affecting the sequence of construction. So.
Is it safe to say for the other issue, that's the absence of the bulkhead and the impact on the foundation, is it safe to say on the other issue, and that is flood mitigation, I think is the safest way to say it, that could be done? Is there anything that, with what you've learned with working with us over the past couple of years, is there anything that can be done post-construction or post-project when the town goes through a permitting process and so forth? There are solutions out there?
Well, I think the solutions for, the concern about the neighborhood are the solutions that Roberge had looked at, and, think of them what you will, some of them are not very practical. And again, you're limited by the fact that you only have, I want to say about I'll quote the wrong number, but about 100 feet from mean high water to the seaward face of the building. It's really not a lot of land to do any kind of soft control vegetation. It limits our options. And again, the fact that it's a public access area for enjoyment of the residents is.
With or without the bulkhead, does the new project, the finished project, increase the, does it mitigate flooding in that sector where the building is? It was a low spot, it had spots that were 7, 6, so forth, that were a constant irritation to everybody?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, we filled in under the building.
Right.
But we're really tying into grades that were already there on each end.
Right. So we're no longer the low point?
It's a little bit higher in the center of the building, but not by much. So basically, we've maintained, or will maintain, that elevation 12 straight through from the stone wall, the parking lot over by Durrell, all the way over to Rickards Beach.
We're still going to do that?
Yeah, we still have that. We just don't have the buried wall and the buried revetment
Yeah,
underneath it all.
And the crest of that is under the building and the
Yeah,
building...
the crest of that is elevation 12, the floor of the building is 14.5. And that gap in between is the free of obstruction area under the building that the water is allowed to pass.
So we all witnessed 3 feet of compacted fill for the locker wing, more than that, added?
I think it's fair to say it's about 3 feet.
Isn't it safe to say that the site under the locker wing is 3 feet higher than it was before?
Well, it's a little deceiving because the sand was pretty high, then we demolished the building, and we scooped out all the old footings, and it was
So it
all kind
shrank
of
a little bit, okay.
mixed up.
Okay.
So, yeah, they brought in 3 feet of fill, but some of the sand, got disturbed and pushed around to other areas with the demolition operation.
I don't see any action item for this committee other than the approval of the remedial work for the building. And the bulkhead we're the school committee where the State Department of Transportation and the town are fighting over the sidewalk. No, I mean, it's what it is. It's kind of within our jurisdiction, it's impacting our project, but we've got to rely on others to solve the problem. We're not saying it's not our problem because we're a responsible committee, but I don't know where to go with this one other than to continue with the project and realize we're not totally painting ourselves in a corner. We're going to have to take advantage of your remedial work because we need beach access, we need good handicap beach access, right?
Yeah, I think the things we're talking about as far as extending stairs and ramps under the
Right.
sand is conservative, and I think it's a prudent thing to do, and I think we should go ahead with that. I can state as the design engineer, we need the additional bracing for the east end of the building. The reason why we didn't feel it was an issue on the west end of the building is because we have a 2-foot deep concrete grade beam, which kind of acts as a egg crate structure, if you will, that tends to stabilize the soils and keep them in place a little bit better.
Questions? Rich, going down the table? Okay.
What's the additional cost for these braces? Is it significant or not significant?
We don't have a dollar amount on that yet, but we anticipate it's going to be less than the credit for removing the bulk, the
Oh, it's going to be a
revetment.
wash or better than a wash. Ian?
We anticipate it's less than the credit, the give back, because the rest of the revetment isn't going to be built.
Ian?
So you use the revetment grant to do the cross bracing?
No,
It's not a grant.
I don't think you can.
I'm not talking about grants, I'm just talking about adds and credits to the construction contract with Shawmut.
All right, let's keep it one meeting here.
Kevin,
Yeah.
quick question on this site plan document that you handed out. It's showing the additional ramp on the westernmost side of the building. That was the ramp that we had agreed would not be there, and that the width of the current deck on the westernmost side of the building would be the same as it is currently.
Okay, so this is the area outside the existing lifeguard station,
Correct.
facing the playground.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, the combination of the deck and ramp is no wider than what was there before.
So you've made both narrower.
That's correct. There was a wider deck outboard of that overhead door that the lifeguards used, and we narrowed that down to make room for the handicap ramp.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Steve? No. Thank you. Two things before the committee in regarding this agenda item. One is the chair, after notifying the committee, authorized an expenditure of $10,000 in the absence and on behalf of the committee for this study that has resulted in the impact on the building of no bulkhead. So what Kevin's been doing. The committee was not in session. I'd appreciate a motion confirming the authorization of $10,000 for design studies and revised drawings for the design changes required by the absence of the bulkhead.
So moved.
It's moved.
Who did it?
Me.
Is there a second? There's a second. Thank you. Any discussion? It's an administrative issue here. All those in favor? Against? Thank you. Next question would be, Kevin, when are you going to be prepared, and when is Shama going to be prepared to address this before the committee as far as cost and final design?
The next committee's meeting is in 2 weeks.
Right.
How much time do you need? Well, we should have this cleaned up by the beginning of next week, at which point Shawmut would need a week to work out the change order pricing, so that should work for your next meeting.
Okay, and if we wait to the next meeting, there'll be no impact on schedule, especially because your work is outside. These modifications can be done anytime, not anytime, but, yeah, okay. Okay, that said, I'd just like to close this line item out, this agenda item out, if everybody's okay with that.
Yep.
Committee, we're going to have to obviously address it when the scope and costs come in. Okay, thank you. And thank everybody on the committee, or all committee members, for their patience on this. I know we're way off agenda, or we're not way off, but we move things around here. That said, and given the hour, we have the usual report from Shawmut, the report from Colliers, and the report from DeStefano Chamberlain. I think the DeStefano Chamberlain report, the only thing we're going to get back to you at this meeting will be the parking lot design. But let's go, if it's all right with the committee, to combine 5 and 6 and just give us an overview from the Colliers perspective and the Shawmut perspective. I think we've all been getting the weekly reports. I've attended at some of the, I know, Rich, you have the job meetings. Project seems to be going very well, knock on wood. I almost hate to say it about this project, but any highlights that you should report, given the fact that are struggling with a long agenda?
No, nothing out of the ordinary. Everything is on schedule. It's actually going very well. You said they removed the piers. They're going to be getting ready to install piles soon.
Are you seeing anything you should be informing us about, or your concerns?
No, not at this point, no. No, it's going very well. We've been monitoring, beginning at the project going back. Initial concerns were, monitoring safety, the fencing, the perimeter. That's been going very well. Shawmut's been doing a great job with that. But everything inside's been clean. That, for that type of job, it's a clean site. It looks good. So we don't have any, concerns to raise at this point.
All right, good, thank you. And from the Shawmut perspective?
I just got to reiterate everything that Chuck just said. Everything's been going fine. The biggest key thing that we just got through was obviously moving the building into the parking lot, getting it stable in the parking lot and leveled. Work has begun underneath the building. The notching, the removal of the spray insulation where we have to install the new steel beams, so that's going well. And everything's been on schedule.
Yes.
You had the biggest test you're ever going to have with clam jam. Was there any effect on the project?
Zero.
No damage?
Zero.
Good, thank you.
Rich?
At the last job meeting, there was some concern about the steel, and you were going to follow up with the new fabricator.
Yeah,
Did
we
you do that?
have. We actually got the shop drawings in for the piece drawings. They're in DeStefano and Chamberlain's hands now for review. We're looking to hopefully get through the review of that at the end of next week, which would allow us to release the steel, which would bring us, at the worst-case scenario, after galvanizing, 8 weeks out from that, which is July 15th.
Okay, so that's even ahead of schedule.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Is that going to allow the steel to be installed while the building's in the parking lot?
Yes.
Okay. So anything else as far as schedule is concerned, any issues, that being the most, this is an issue where the steel supplier, the original low-bid steel supplier went out of business, and we had to substitute a new steel supplier, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, issues from project status? Are we, excuse me, but are we, oh, Andy's not here, we should be posting, and I think we have been posting Kevin's reports or Collier's reports, or both?
Last I saw on the website, I think it's just been DeStefano and Chamberlain's, and we've sent ours through, but I haven't seen them posted, so I'm not sure.
So the public has...
We do have another batch that will come out by Monday.
So as far as the public wanting to know what's going on and where we are, your reports are being posted. your
Andy's
observations.
been very good
Your
about
field
making sure the
opera- field
webmaster
opera-
gets them up.
Okay. Questions on this? Anything in this area?
I was just going to ask a question about Shawmut. You guys are going to start doing monthly reports. I haven't seen one. When is the first report coming out?
At the end of this month.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that would take us through 5 and 6, if anybody has any objections. If you feel you've had enough of a...
Yeah, the only thing maybe we should opine on is the GMP reconciliation, Jim. We did that. We met last month with the Finance Subcommittee. We resolved all the issues. There are a couple minor issues, nothing major. But we resolved them, and everything, as far as we're concerned, that's a closed issue.
Okay, I'm going to hit that in old business. There's actually 2 issues there.
Okay.
Anything else on this? Kevin, do you have anything on your agenda that you do? The parking lot? Do we want to discuss that tonight? We do.
Sure, we can discuss
Because
that.
we definitely want to turn the tape on for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's a second 11 by 17 packet I handed out to the committee. The first page is the site plan, and it is a little small, but I think you can make out most of it. So what we've done is we took the rough sketch I had at the prior meeting a month ago of the parking lot layout and where we would keep pavers and where we would install drainage in lieu of pavers. And this has been drawn to scale and put on the actual site plan and refined a little bit. On the second page is kind of a blow-up of what you would see at the typical parking space down that center row of parking, where the porous pavers would be removed. Instead, you would see a trench drain. This was something that I had discussed with the Public Works Director as to the general approach and what he felt would be feasible for the site and what their maintenance preferences are for maintaining drainage structures. Basically, there's a 9-foot wide parking space. 7 feet of the parking space would be a trench drain, and you'd have a 2-foot strip of asphalt in between, so that even though the grading on the trench is pretty good and is unlikely to have people get their feet caught, where they walk between cars is solid asphalt. And I thought that was erring on the side of safety with concerns about, foot traffic and women in high heel shoes, etc. So that's what you would look at a typical space. You see the gray lines are the painted stripes between the spaces. The crosshatch pattern is where the trench drain would be between spaces. And then the dashed lines are where we would have stormwater chambers under the pavement that the trench drains would tie into. In speaking with Public Works, their preference was to have a hard bottom trench, which if you flip to the third page, you can see a detail of, so that basically the trench would collect any sediment. It would accumulate on the bottom before it could drain out into anything, and then it could be periodically maintained either by shoveling out or by using their vacuum trucks that they typically have for drainage maintenance. So the water would fall in through the grate into the concrete trench. At each end of the trench, it would drain into a plastic pipe, which would then tee off into relatively inexpensive and very effective stormwater chambers that allow the water to accumulate and disperse into the crushed stone that's surrounding them. So that's the approach we're recommending. It's pretty much in keeping with what I went over with the committee a month ago. The detail has been refined with the trench drain, and I did get rid of the gravel strip option because it seemed like there were more cons than pros to that, and there was some concern from the committee about that being workable. But this is the design we're recommending. It keeps the elevation of the parking lot in front of the building at elevation 8 that makes all the steps and ramps function as designed. It keeps the porous pavers, a significant quantity of them, more than half of them, around the perimeter of the lot, the bottom of the slope, where they will continue to receive water and allow it to percolate into the ground. And it replaces the areas of paver islands in the middle of the parking lot, with drainage structures that will have the same effect, so that you don't get the entire 100-foot width of parking lot sheeting off to one edge. You pick up half of it, and then you pick up half of it again.
Thank you. Comments from the committee? So, in the finished product, as we're looking at it here, would be a finished asphalt paved and striped parking lot with the pavers along the perimeter as shown would remain, and through the middle of the parking lot you'd have this new drainage system.
That's correct.
So as water sheeted down slope, half of it would be picked up by the drainage system and the balance would be absorbed in the pavers.
Yeah, the extent of new trench drains are in the same areas where currently there are islands of porous pavers.
Okay.
And the areas where there aren't trench drains, where the asphalt runs continuously, is where currently the asphalt runs continuously.
And this solution allows us to go back up to grade the increased height of the parking lot at the building, which mitigates the building height in a way. Or the
It
visual.
does. It doesn't result in a hardship in terms of parking lot pitch. It maintains the original intent and purpose of having porous pavers on the property. We've kept the areas that are in excellent condition and that can easily be preserved. We haven't disturbed the perimeter of the site. The rain gardens have been replaced by just keeping the pavers where they are at the edges of the property. And I feel it's functional, and I believe that the Public Works and Engineering have endorsed this concept to my knowledge.
So the problem here obviously is cost, and the paving of this parking lot's in the project, in the GMP?
Yes.
So there'll be slightly less paving because, or more paving?
Slightly less paving because.
Yeah, there's an
the
added
existing
island
pavers would
here,
remain.
but we'd have to get it to them to look at it.
The area is reduced. There is more care that has to be taken in removing and replacing pavers for a few utility trenches that are crossing where the pavers would remain. And there's some patching of the pavers where the two construction entrances are. That it previously was not an issue because we were just paving everything over.
And Joe, I'm glad you're still here. There was originally the Department of Public Works, which we always appreciated, shared some labor with us on this parking lot because of the pavers and the desire to keep the pavers and so forth. We've been through that drill in and out of the bids, in and out of the GMP. This is where we are tonight. Project pays for the structures, and DPW is going to put them in?
Correct. So, we had figured partial involvement. So this is basically the same level of effort and cost as in the previous design plans.
Well, yeah, I think putting those pavers, the pavers would be more
Yeah,
expensive. I mean,
Yep.
Okay. We got to change the tapes if you're going to, starting at the end, go ahead, Rich.
How many of these are going to be on site? How many of these galleys or whatever, actually you're calling them?
The storm chambers? There would be one for every trench. I can count them out, actually, if you give me a minute.
He looks like one of our grant writers standing there.
78.
Is there a calculation that dictates that number?
Yes, it's conservative. I'm actually putting in 2 for every trench.
Right.
But yes, there is.
So this is based on a calculation so that we're not going to have, all right. your answer
That's
to my
correct.
question. Okay, thank you.
Here we go again. We've already voted on this. I'm glad that you came up with a nice design. It looks very industrial to me. If it was the Stop and Shop parking lot, I would say fine, makes a lot of sense. This is the beach area. We all live down near the beach because of natural beauty, and you're taking away what little natural beauty there is left of this entire complex by removing pavers and the natural color of sand. This committee has already voted on this, and yet here we are again with a proposal to change it. So I am going to make a recommendation that this committee sticks with the vote that we have already made, and if by some chance the committee decides that we should change our vote to go with this program, I can think of a lot of other topics in this design plan that I'd like to change as well. Thank you.
Steve?
I'll follow up. I just had some more technical questions. I think you answered Rich's question. So what's the the design capacity for these things? Or was it just, these are the spots to put them in and let's shed as much water? So the depth of the trench, the amount of the
No, it's
rock.
actually sized for the runoff. So basically, it's handling the top 50% of the parking lot.
Okay.
Because everything is pitching towards the street.
And so if you have a flood event, or that amount of water, it's not going to undermine everything else outside? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Can I ask Ian a question?
Wait, one
Is
more.
Ian, can I ask Ian, Mr. Chairman, can I ask him a
Well,
question?
while he's still, well, let's go back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I agree with Ian on the paver issue, so just want to make that known.
Go ahead, you had a question? Thank you.
Ian, do you have issue with putting the trenches in, or it's just taking out the pavers? I mean, both?
Aye.
Okay. Ian, excuse me. Ian, whatever you... There's a lot of other things people have called you, but that doesn't really matter.
Even on TV.
Even on TV. So the question is, what is your issue with, do you have a problem with the trenches? Seems to be a good solution, but the problem with taking the pavers out. If we can accommodate the trench and the pavers, would that be acceptable to you?
How would you do that?
How would you, how would you do that?
Well, again, I don't know, but the question is, your issue is the taking the pavers out.
Right, in the center.
Okay, and the question becomes is, if there's some accommodation with keeping as many pavers as possible and still putting the trench in, would that be acceptable to you?
Well, I guess the point is, if you have the pavers, you don't need the trenches.
They're mutually exclusive.
Is that a correct statement, though? That the fact that if there was pavers there would be no need for trenches? I'm not in a position to know.
Is that true, Kevin?
Is that a correct statement, that if we left pavers there would be no need for trenches?
The whole reason we're doing this is to replace the pavers. This is a one-for-one replacement of the function of the pavers. Yes, that is completely true.
Do we know, this was originally driven by the fact that the cost of replacing the pavers was bid as an alternate ad and not included in the GMP?
Correct.
So if you were to provide us with an alternate price between the materials required and the cooperation of DPW to put in the trench drains versus the replacement of the pavers in those islands in the middle? Suppose you didn't go with Kevin's design, and you put a bed of pavers in there, two long islands of pavers, and similar to what we have. It's going to be new material because we know just from pulling up samples that they're damaged beyond repair or replacement. So that's the deal. I mean, either you have a new, more mechanical-looking, industrial-looking, or commercial-looking drainage system, or you have the pavers back. And the pavers aren't in the budget.
The existing pavers can be removed. There's going to be a loss factor because some of them won't come out in one piece. And that is not, let me emphasize, that is not from construction activity.
Right.
It was like that when we started the project.
No, I think we went through that.
Hope
'cause we
nobody's going to
tested-
suggest otherwise.
No.
Okay. So we can reuse the ones that come out whole. The exact same paver is manufactured, is available. I looked at what it would take to replace, I think, all the pavers in the lot, and the materials are about $30,000. I have no idea what the labor is. You guys could chime in on that, but
Right.
You know, if we were to take just the center islands instead of putting trenches in, putting pavers back, and we had to use all new pavers, you know, it would be half of that, plus the labor.
Kevin, putting aside the issue of drainage, from an aesthetic standpoint, is there a way to incorporate some pavers, for example, on border areas or around, you know, a walkway or something like that, that would kind of soften the look of the blacktop, for lack of a better term?
Sure. We could introduce as many areas as you want. It's really, at this point, a cost issue. You know, for that matter, we can introduce landscape islands.
Because I think, I agree with Ian that from an aesthetic standpoint, having that pretty much being all blacktop, it's probably not appropriate for the neighborhood. From a strictly economic and drainage standpoint, your plan makes sense. I'm just trying to find a way to, you know, kind of to David's point, find some compromise where we can, you know, kind of soften the blow of the aesthetics, but still have the drainage that we need and still stay within budget. I don't know if that's possible or if it would work, but just something to think about.
Joe, you wouldn't have a problem working with Shawma to figure out where we really are in putting these pavers back? Whether we use them, whether we buy all new, or whether we assume we have a 50% loss?
Yeah, not a problem, whatever.
All right. We're going to table this and bring it back as the two alternates. You want to add anything to the minutes, Ian?
I can't, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard on behalf of this committee. For us to continually kick the can down the road on a project, on a portion of a project that we've voted with is totally irresponsible.
I hear you. If we had the money, we wouldn't be talking about it.
I don't believe money is the issue. We found out after we had already discussed and decided on this the very first time that it was an alt ad. We thought it was all included in the problem. And for the record, I would also like to emphasize that this entire discussion about a redesign of the parking lot has been caused by the engineering staff who, for lack of a better word or term, has attempted to perfume the pig as much as they can, because we're building this huge building that's going to be lifted halfway up to the sky, and they're concerned about the visual from the street. It's not the visual from the street. If you raise the parking lot level, if you're driving by, you're still going to see a structure that's larger than anything else around it. This is totally ridiculous.
Okay.
And I'm not done, excuse me, thank you. One last point I'd like to make. To the
Make
point,
note of his last point.
to the point that was made by our RTM member who happens to live in the neighborhood about us as a town not wasting money. I'd like everyone to realize the existing parking lot costs $400,000. And I don't see any reason why we can't use the existing parking lot as it is. I've walked it several times, even during construction. The pavers are in pretty good shape. And I'm really tired of this discussion. And kicking it down the road is totally irresponsible on behalf of this committee. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. I would only take exception that it's not engineering staff that's been concerned about the height of the building. It's the committee that's been concerned about the height of the building, led early on by your comments and concerns about the neighborhood and the building being too high and too big. So what we're trying to do, and every chance we get, is to mitigate that. And increasing the elevation of the parking lot at the building by 1.5 feet, 2 feet, makes a difference. Makes a difference as far...
At the front of the building by 1.5 feet.
Makes a difference. Whether you're driving by or walking up to it or getting out of your car, it's just that less imposing and massive.
With all due respect, for the people who live there, that's not true. If you're standing, this is important, if you're standing directly in front of it and you have the visual of the parking lot going up, what you're saying is absolutely accurate. I agree. However, if you're one of the people who has spent a lot of money redoing their house, or if you're one of the people who has moved into this neighborhood because of the fact that you wanted to be closer to nature and closer to the beach and spent a lot of money, 7 figures, to buy a new house, it will be noticeable whether you have the raised parking lot or not, because you see not just the building, you see the surrounding area. Again, there's a term they use down in Texas quite a bit. You can only perfume the pig so much.
Okay. Understood. Okay. Anything else? We're going to table this and continue to beat our way through it, and hopefully we'll come back with the pavers in some kind of an agreement between the town and the committee, and we could even bring in the grant writer in Hartford on this. We could find that person. Joe, you know who that is? Now, don't tell us, please.
It's under the bulkhead right now.
We have a, don't go away, Joe, but we have a agenda item as far as any approvals of invoices. Is there something that's supposed to come before us tonight? Okay, you want to, who's going to present that? Steve, you, Rich?
Steve, all right. There's invoice for the Stefano and Chamberlain, number 5523, in the amount of $10,910.
Excuse the mic, Rich.
Mike?
The Finance Committee has reviewed it, and I recommend that we approve it.
Yeah. Are there any questions on that? Subcommittee's reviewed, asking for committee approval. Gone through it. Colliers has gone through it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I entertain a motion to approve.
I second it.
Somebody make
Need a
it?
motion first.
Yeah, he made
Oh.
it. Made and seconded. Any discussion?
Okay, who made the motion
I made the motion.
and who seconded?
I second it.
There's been motion made and seconded to approve the invoice, and the amount is, for the record?
$10,910. The next invoice is for Colliers International.
All in favor? Against? Thank you.
The next invoice is for Colliers International, invoice number 15841, in the amount of $6,625.40. And this checked out with the proportion of the work that has been accomplished under their contract.
Okay. All those in favor? We need a motion, sorry. Make a motion, please. One motion's made. Seconded. Thank you, Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you.
Third invoice is for United Illuminating, invoice number 196450, in the amount of $300. And I saw the bill on the original UI document. It is what it is, $300.
Thank you. Motion? Motion made. Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Against? Anything else?
The big invoice from Shormut, Woodworking and Supply. Is that the proper name for this invoice? Okay. And it's invoice, it's actually requisition number 7, isn't it, really? Yes. Yeah, not invoice, it's a requisition. And we've gone over that, the Finance Committee has gone over it, and we find, in conjunction with Colliers, and take no exception.
All set with Colliers?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. We take no exception with all that we saw in it.
The invoice number is?
It's a requisition 7.
Requisition 7, and the amount is?
The amount is $904,000, $904,772.43.
Motion made, seconded. Any discussion on this? This is the main construction requisition. No discussion. All those in favor? Against? Abstain? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, has a question. At the last meeting, there was an invoice that came in from the town attorney, which we tabled because we felt it was not properly submitted, and I wonder what's the status of that invoice?
We've spoken with Stan Lesser, he's going to resubmit the invoice. We haven't received it yet.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
We, the only thing we didn't discuss tonight is the, well, we could do that under Stan Lesser's, well, no, that was an invoice, not an opinion. The steel contractor, has that been resolved, and is there a change order going through the system, and should we be getting that, or we don't have it yet, or?
I believe we forwarded the change order to the Finance Subcommittee for consideration.
Any action on that from the Finance Subcommittee, from this committee?
I thought we should possibly discuss it to make sure that everyone understood what was behind it.
Are you prepared to discuss it? You want to table it?
I'm prepared to discuss this.
All right, good.
Right? I'm looking for the exact change order. The issue came with the first subcontractor that was named and included in the GMP that went subsequent to the letter of intent issued by Shawmut, ended up going into bankruptcy. So Shawmut, I'll say by default, had to go to the second low bidder, which the second low bidder on this job was QSR Steel, I believe, correct? Sorry, I had it right here in front of me. So in order to make up the difference between the first low bidder that was included in the GMP and the second low bidder, there's a change order request number 1 from Shawmut in front of the committee for $39,067.
How much?
$39,067, which includes not only includes the associated general liability and fee, which is part of the GMP. The net difference between the bidders was $37,900. After conferring with town attorney, this appears to be something that is outside of Shawmut's control, and would be part of our coming out of the town's contingency fund.
Any comments from purchasing as far as this? Is this now over, this whole back and forth, and?
We did consult with Stanton Lesser. He did present his opinion in writing to the committee as well as to the town. The town CFO is on board as well. Due to the, I guess, lag in funding process from the date of bids, we could not hold that bid for such time. I believe it was held an additional 30 days after the bidding date.
Yes.
Through funding. So as far as legal is concerned, Shawmut obviously is not responsible for that
And
difference.
just for the record, this is whether or not the town can gain access to the bid bond.
Correct.
And because of the prolonged nature of starting up the project, they were able to use that as an excuse, the surety, as far as providing the bid bond,
Yes, sir.
funding the difference.
Right, and there was a letter of intent issued as the named subcontractor. After that point in time, the bid bond is also
Right.
no longer
Right.
applies, excuse me.
Right.
So with that, it's a situation that was fallen upon Shawmut and the committee, and therefore, in order to get the structural steel portion of this project done, going to the next low bidder that was then subsequently qualified, there's a delta in the cost, and there's an increase in cost of a total of $39,067.
Which
to
would
the
come out
GMP.
of contingency unless it comes out of somebody else's contingency,
Correct.
like the construction managers. Is there, is one of the responsibilities of the CM is due diligence as far as these bidders are concerned? Is there any, would there be any reason why we would know in advance that this company was in the financial shape it was in?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. So the question to move this, it's just going to come back to us if we don't dispose of it tonight.
Well, I don't think we can fully dispose of it tonight because Collier's had some comments on the change order request. I believe they've passed along to Shawmut about the potential the day impact, the schedule impact, and any overtime required was TBD on the change order proposal. So if Shawmut can please complete that and resubmit.
Yeah, with the schedule the way it is and the amount of time we have to get steel on site for the GMP schedule, which is August 26th, I think we can change it to be determined to that there won't be a schedule impact. In the last week, QSR Steel, the second low bidder, has gotten very heavily engaged on getting all the 80-something piece drawings to Kevin to review, and they're fully engaged now. So it's being able to see that they are, engaged in getting us drawings and taking the steps to move forward. We now feel that we can put a timeline to that, and we feel that timeline, it will make the schedule
So
without
if
overtime.
Okay, if that can be resubmitted to state that, that can funnel back through Collier's to the committee, and I think we can act on it in the next meeting. Vote on it, because right now I don't have a change order proposal that we can
That you'd rather
approve.
do? Okay, table to the next meeting, if that's, okay.
Yeah, just add, I think the only other clarification was also on the overtime, projected overtime, if you guys can clarify that as well. It was a anything that's undetermined, we just should determine it.
I think I did make one of those changes.
You did schedule impact, you hit
On
zero?
overtime, I think it was
Yeah,
a
on the
schedule I
schedule
kept to
impact.
be determined, but that strictly was because we still hadn't had complete drawings from them yet, which we had gotten within the
So
last
we'll
week.
probably iron those out by then, I'm sure.
If we get ironed out, and I think it can go to in
We
front of the board for approval.
Yeah, we still won't have anything unresolved where it can come back later.
And one quick clarification on All Face Steel, from what we found out, they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They're not going out of business. And in the process of sending them the letter of intent, we then worked on the contract. And in the contract, it says you need to provide a payment and performance bond, which they were not able to provide because their bonding agent said they were at capacity. So we terminated them for that, not being able to provide a payment and performance bond.
A payment performance bond required over a certain threshold level?
Yes, sir, over 50 grand.
I think 100,000.
The town does 50, but
On
if
this-
you do 100,
This project was 100, but
Well, regardless, they...
it was 100 on this project.
They were above that threshold?
Yes.
And may I ask, is QSR under contract now?
They have the letter of intent, and we're working through their contract right now.
Okay.
You should get them under contract. We don't want to go through this again. You're comfortable with everything that's been said so far on this?
I think I would caution to get them under contract. Honestly, I think Sean is at risk without approval of the change from the committee to accept the increase in the cost, just looking, contractually, and I'd refer that to the town attorney, but if they put them under contract without approval from this committee, I guess, is there a risk? And I don't know that question. I would just bring that as a point of question.
Well, you wouldn't have a problem with a conditional approval. In other words, if there's no schedule impact, which is your concern, the numbers are not going to change.
And that's what I'm bringing up, because I think what's in front of me today, in front of the Finance Subcommittee, we cannot say it can be approved because it's incomplete, given the TBD on overtime and schedule delay, or excuse me, schedule impact. So if that's changed, I think we can offer, Mr. Chairman, a conditional approval of this amount. I just wanted to understand what the total amount.
Schedule change is 0. That's in the document that we have, the latest one. The only one that has TBD is the overtime, which I think if it's 0, then we're fine. But if that's not determined, it's up to you guys to.
We certainly feel more comfortable now after last week's.
So it's
So there'd be 0 project overtime and 0 additional days to the
Correct.
schedule. If that's a condition, then.
Rich and Steve, they okay with that?
I am. I didn't know that until we sat
Yeah, I
here.
understand. I just want to keep it moving.
Yeah.
So this is a hit-on contingency.
So if the
It's
committee's
totally out of our
comfortable
control.
with, I'm sorry, I interrupted
Yeah,
you.
go ahead.
If the committee's comfortable with approving it, then we'll make sure it gets just put forth for final signature as it comes through.
Right? We want to keep this going. Yep, I agree. Especially contractually. A motion then to approve the change order number 1? Is that what it is?
Correct.
And the amount, again, restate the amount?
$39,067.
So I'll make a motion to approve Shawmut's change order request 001 in the amount of $39,067 with no schedule impact and no extra funds due for overtime to complete the scope of work.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Can you
Any dis-
repeat the second part of that, please?
With no schedule impact and no additional funds required for overtime to complete this scope of work.
Any discussion? Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? Against? Abstain? Thank you.
Who abstained? Did anybody
No, I just said abstain. We have two things which we're not going to bring up tonight. I would like to have you comment at the next meeting, Chuck, about the GMP review that you started, and then I want to make sure that you're comfortable with the reconciliation of the pre-con costs. I didn't hear any more about that other than to walk into a meeting. We don't need that tonight, but
Okay.
those would be the two things.
Sure.
New business or old business? Before we adjourn, we had a public comment session. If somebody's moved as something they've heard, did I just hear a big sigh? Yes. No, you're not on the public, you're on the committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
point of order.
Yeah.
Point of order. Thank you. Parliamentary procedure dictates that an agenda item that has been properly presented, discussed, and voted upon should not appear on future agendas for discussion. and further vote. I'm therefore advising this committee that further discussion and agenda points regarding redesign for approval of the parking lot be stricken from future agendas and records. Parliamentary procedure.
Good. I'll take that to the town and get a reading on that on behalf of the committee. Any other comments, questions, new business, old business? Nope. Yes.
I have a quick question. If the remaining easterly portion of the bulkhead is not removed, is the cross bracing still necessary?
Best answer I can give you is that, let me look at that, because I don't know exactly where it's been cut off relative to the east wing. So I don't want to answer that right now, but I'd be happy to look into it.
Joe, any final comments from you on as far as this issue? I don't want to reopen it. You've now sat through the entire meeting.
No, I think we discussed it at length.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Made, second.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Don't raise your hand around here. Things move quickly.
I was trying to be polite and wait my turn. I would comment that just as the timber bulkheads situation is influencing cross-bracing on the wooden piles, it also will be an influence on the performance of the stacked block retaining wall at the parking lot edge of the sand. So I would suggest that Kevin include that aspect of the overall site plan in his review of the influence of removing timber bulkhead. And I would also ask that any documents handed to this committee be put on your website. I know that you're doing a good job on that, but like the one I handed out tonight, I'd like that on the website just for general reference by whoever wants to look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin, is there an issue there? You're going to have to get rid of all the fill and liquefy the sand and...
I don't have a strong concern about that wall in the front because it's that much further away from the effect of the waves and because it's going to be backfilled by a very good quality process fill that I think is going to be held together very well by the geogrid. I mean, having said that, it's not a flood wall. It's not meant to take a direct wave hit. It is a retaining wall. So it's not built to the same standard, but I do feel it will perform adequately.
Is that an interlocking block?
The blocks are pinned together with fiberglass pins, and then locked into the pins is a high-strength composite plastic grid that goes back into the soil. So it's a reinforced earth wall.
We almost got out of here. There was a motion to adjourn.
Just say one quick thing. As a member of the neighborhood, I would also add that Kristen Robinson, that the pavers are much more appropriate in terms of appearance, especially if you're going to slant it, because that asphalt is going to be in your face and with the cars on top of it. So.
Thank you. On that...
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Was the second one? I was going to add something else, but I'm not. Is there a second? Yes, we're adjourned. Thank you.